hello. Hopefully I can wrap this up in a timely manner. This is not part of a bigger project, but maybe with enough support it will be one day. I just have a lot to say and a lot that I added for everything I cut. So let's get started. So if you're not familiar with the show Metalocalypse, it was an Adult Swim show, aired from 2006 to 2013, got unceremoniously canceled, got brought back for a series finale in 2023, and it follows the death metal band Death Clock, which has the members lead singer Nathan Explosion, lead guitarist Squizgar Squigelf, rhythm guitarist Toki Wartooth, bassist William Murderface, and of course drummer Pickles the drummer. And so Metalocalypse broadly focuses on death metal culture, but specifically how that integrates within celebrity culture and the ideas of authenticity. And of course, I'm looking at the Abject as well because this is, in a sense, sort of a horror comedy. There's death, violence, gore, nonsense, chaos all around, and it's normal and it's expected. And so I'm looking at how all these themes sort of weave together into challenging Death Clock in their ideas of remaining brutal and hypermasculine and heteronormative, but at the same time, everything around them is forcing their true, authentic selves out. And so, of course, when we're looking at the Abject, we have to look at Julia Kristeva and her definition of the Abject as analyzed through powers of horror. So put simply, it is the Abject has only one quality of the object, that of being opposed to I. So it's anything that is separate from you, but that is visceral. It has a visceral reaction upon viewing it. It's diametrically opposed to the self, so it's like the uncanny, the dead, but even more distant than that. And so in Metalocalypse, of course, that's seen through the mediums of death metal and the horror, gory sort of aspect through it. The presentation itself, I did a lot to make sure I didn't actually have to show any explicit gore or the flashing images in the show, because there's a lot. The only sort of accessibility thing I have is that for the clips that I have, I could not manage to get the captions to work very well. So I apologize for that, but hopefully it'll still be comprehensible. So first, a little background on death metal is that specifically it is a reactionary genre that came about in the 90s as a reaction to the popular glam and heavy metal in the 80s. It is very specifically anti-mainstream with the focus on extremity, death, violence, brutality, gore, everything on that. You're probably not going to listen to it on the radio unless it's specifically like a metal-themed radio station. And that is very much intentional. And so the sonic atmosphere is meant to match the visual aesthetic in the lyrics, the sound. It's heavy, it's aggressive, it's incomprehensible unless you are insane like me and you can't hear some of the lyrics. And so it's very much the Abject in musical form. It's kind of similar to the way horror is appreciated in film and literature. It's sort of the horror as a music genre. And so in the next slide, I'm going to give a quick sample of death metal sound just so we're all on the same page. This is a clip from a Cannibal Corpse music video. They're arguably the most famous death metal band. And actually, Corpse Grinder, the lead singer, he has been involved in Metalocalypse as well. Metalocalypse likes to have musicians have cameos and guest roles in it. And he's actually wearing a Death Clock shirt in this music video. That was not intentional, I just got lucky. Yeah, that song's about zombie apocalypse. So a big thing also is the hypermasculinity of death metal. Like glam metal and heavy metal, a lot of that sort of played with gender and androgyny a lot. Death metal, in being a reactionary genre, doesn't really want to do that. Now, that's not to say that there aren't women in death metal. There absolutely are, and there have been ever since it started. One of the earliest instances of a woman being involved in a death metal band is Jo Bench, pictured here. She was the bassist for the band Bolt Thrower, and they started in the early 80s. They were one of the late 80s. They were one of the first death metal bands. And then more notably, we have Angela Gasso and later Alyssa White was as the lead singers of Arch Enemy, but they were added later. Originally the band started with the male lead singer, but they added a woman later, and then now we see many, even all women bands today. But so even though women have always been involved in death metal and still continue to be, they're still very much the minority. At the same time, death metal and other extreme metal genres are also really popular amongst LGBTQ metalheads. There was a informal survey conducted in about 2015 that found that death metal overwhelmingly was the favored metal subgenre amongst LGBTQ metalheads, regardless of the fact that a lot of musicians and fans still sort of hold on to this hegemonic cisgender heteronormative idea of masculinity. Again, I sort of compare it to horror films. Like, there's queer people love horror films, and at the same time, I guess queer people love death metal. I mean, I can say that. Then I go with death metal, like I mentioned, how it's reactionary and anti-mainstream. That sort of ties into the idea of authenticity. You get this sort of idea of authenticity in true art in metal discourse a lot because metalheads are insufferable. And so you get this sort of idea that because it is reacting to like the truths of the world, like the brutal, unpleasant truths of the world, and that sort of makes it true art in this sense. That's the argument. But at the same time, when you look at the abject in art, as Kristeva sort of describes an example of the abject, it is a cynic, a psychoanalyst who establishes narcissistic power while pretending to reveal the abyss. It is an artist who practices his art as a business. And so that is where it starts to get really interesting when we start to look at Metalocalypse and Death Clock specifically, because they are, in the universe of the show, they are the biggest cultural force, period. They start the show as the 12th largest economy and ended as the 7th largest economy in the world. Global economies are dependent on the success of the band. They've solved world conflicts. They are bigger than Taylor Swift. So it's just the fact. So it becomes very interesting when you see this very anti-mainstream, intentionally genre suddenly get to the point where it can be the biggest cultural force in the world, period. And again, I have an example of Death Clock's music specifically here. Not here, after this, but it goes into their idea of brutality. They will cite themselves as the most brutal music in the world, and that's interesting if you, again, get into really geeky stuff about metal like I do, where it's like, your Death Clock is technically considered melodic death metal, they're not brutal death metal, those are different things. It doesn't matter, but they're different. So, yeah, here's what they said. Oh my gosh, play this song. Yeah. Oh, is it not? Oh? Oh, okay. That song's about mermaid murder. There's 3 mermaider songs, they're all awesome. And then we get to their actual aesthetic, where when they're performing, most often they are donning corpse paint intentionally to look dead, to look abject like this. But it also sort of does go into the idea that they are taking ideas of more brutal or different kinds of extreme metal and taking them for themselves. Historically, corpse paint is more associated with black metal, which I don't have a new example of black metal here, but again, it's very different. It's just the whole thing. It doesn't matter, but it does. Take a shot every time I say that. So, oh geez. Okay, so I got excited there. But the next clip, I'm going to start going into the examples from the show of them sort of playing with their authenticity and rejecting what is very clearly true feelings in favor of this image that they have cultivated for themselves. So the context for the next clip is that their manager is presumed to be dead. He's not, he's fine. But he's presumed to be dead, and it's causing the rhythm guitarist Toki to really struggle on folks' 60s in mourning, so.
Mrs. and Pickles. What y'all do? I mean, you know we don't see. Why don't you say it, Pickles? Toki. Because it means sadness makes you gay.
But apparently carrying his picture in a locket makes you straight. So the idea that admitting to care that their manager, who at this point they think is dead, that would be gay, and equivalent to perceived homosexuality is something that they have to reject, something that they can't even talk about amongst themselves. And this is very common because they definitely refuse throughout the show to show care for one another. Even though they do, but they have a band rule that is, quote, never show interest, care, or intervene in bandmates' personal lives, never. But they do that both before that rule is established and after. So they're not allowed to care about each other, right? But we see them break this rule. One of the most notable examples, and this is where we get into a lot of the homoerotic subtext of the show. So one of the major examples is that in another episode, the same episode that this rule is established, the band has, decided they were going to watch porn together, and they watch a video of a man committing autofellatio, and then they decide, let's all see if we can do that together.
Yeah, I mean, it's starting to feel a little on the homoerotic side. Maybe we should just try and see what happens, alright?
Alright, you first, Murderface.
Well, that's not whiny!
Hey, now's the time to check it out, Murderface.
Sorry,
Now's the time to show it.
Shit, fuck. You're right.
Right, okay. Now suck your own dick.
So they absolutely recognize that it's gay, but they still do it anyway, but they fail because they're not flexible enough. And then later they're having this conversation about it.
This whole thing about us saying they're gonna know what, yeah. I think we should put that chapter behind us. I mean, it's just too gay for words.
You know what, you're right. You're okay. I think you're right.
Look, and I also thought about this. I mean, sucking your own woman, it's not very metal. I mean, we don't need to answer reason, but I'm just,
So that's sort of, again, him bringing up, yeah, it's gay, but also it's not metal. It ties into the idea that their image of being metal, of being the most brutal band in the world, is important to them, probably more important than already the idea of not seeming gay, but I mean, it kind of goes back and forth between which was more important to them. So another significant example of them repressing any sort of homoerotic or any kind of desires like that is in the episode where they decide they're going to create their own fashion line, and this is what they come up with. And, and yes, they are just wearing that in a grocery store. And so it's, you can see it's very tight, it's all leather, it's evoking gay BDSM kind of context there. And this whole episode itself just delves into that. Another through line throughout this episode is that William, the bassist, he is so afraid of being seen as gay that he won't eat anything phallic shaped, but then he will later lick a sausage inside of a closet. And then the fact that it's later revealed that the clothes that they're wearing are actually made from the skin of slaughtered female models. So that evokes the sort of Buffalo Bill, Silence of the Lambs kind of abject transsexual idea there. And then you can even see them reckoning with, like, that's them realizing what's going on. And this is one of the few times where in this world filled with violence and gore, a lot of which happens at their own concerts, they are actually repulsed by that. And I would argue that it's the repulsion of finding out not just that this horrific thing is happening, but also that they're wearing women's bodies. They're sort of, taking on that transsexual, almost cross-dressing kind of subtext, and that's a more abject terror than just the fact that there's slaughter going on in the first place. So speaking of like the women as abject, there are very few female characters in Metalocalypse. The majority of them are what the band refers to as groupie sluts. So they're really only there to be eye candy and for the band to, have sex with after concerts, what you do with groupies. And so that kind of goes again into the idea of women as abject, which, as Christopher would say, that other sex, the feminine, becomes synonymous with a radical evil that is to be suppressed. Because in most other cases where the women aren't just sexual objects for the band, in most cases they are put into an antagonistic role. So we can see it where there's abusive, manipulative girlfriends. One of them is even a suicide bomber who takes on this sort of similar, like, groupie flashing imagery there. Some of them are cult leaders. Some of them are just their mothers who they have terrible relationships with. The biggest example of a woman who is not this is Abigail, who is introduced in season 4. She's the producer, and she starts off as the abject, as someone who's going to be a threat to the band and their creative process. But she does eventually gain their respect by proving her capability. And then immediately after that, they all decide, okay, well now she's an object, and they all try to have sex with her, which she rejects all of them until, for shenanigans, she does end up having a sexual encounter with Nathan, but instead of her providing the sexual pleasure to him, he's providing the sexual pleasure to her, which he said earlier in that episode he would never go down on a woman, but then he does. But she's still, further after that, even though they've had this, he starts to believe that now, okay, that means we're dating. But she says, no, it doesn't mean we're dating. And he proposes to her in the movie, and she says, we're not even dating. He says, no, and she leaves. But it totally destroys this idea of what a woman is supposed to be. Either she's this abject terror, she's this object of sexual desire, or if I claim her in this way of objects objectivity, sexual desire, that means we're married, but no. So, okay. Let's go to the movie, because throughout this show there was a lot of mystical stuff going on in the background, and I don't really have time to go into it. It doesn't matter. All you have to know is that they have to sing a song to stop the, what happened? So in the movie, in order to stop this eldritch god I mentioned during the break, they have to write the Song of Salvation, which would stop him. But Nathan dismisses that he's even capable of writing a Song of Hope.
Hope is a metal concept. People don't come to me for salvation. They come to me if they want a song about how your guts will be liquefied by a weed whacker. I sing about death, not about how to live.
And so first of all, he's definitely sung about hope before in the show. Performances like the galaxy after In Universe, they solved the Israel-Syria conflict. And then in the song Blazing Star, after they saved Toki and Abigail from being kidnapped. Long stories, both of those. But so he's clearly capable of this. He's done it before, but suddenly he's not thinking that he is, probably because it has to do with the automatic idea, the weight of the world, all this abject sort of forces coming at him, that he just sort of retreats back into the familiar, the expectations of both his gender and his genre. So instead he decides, well, I guess I'll just write the most brutal song ever, because that's what I know, that's what's expected from me. And so he writes and performs the song Aortic Desecration, which is called the dying song in it. So what do you think happens when you play the dying song? The Metalocalypse happened. So this is a complete acceptance of the abject as powered by Death Clock. In their way to try to stay authentic, they ended up actually shoving away authenticity and true feelings that they do have, because they feel this abject force to just do what they're expected to do. And so this goes, I have a long quote from Julie Kristeva, which I was going to read, but now in the interest of time, thanks to the technical difficulties, I'll skip it, but it's just the idea of the apocalypse and the abjection tumbling into the writer, which is especially prescient because Nathan is specifically the songwriter. He has to write the words to it. The band can't help him, it's not allowed. So at this point, the abject is no longer just an aesthetic for them. It is something that they are reckoning with in real time. And we've seen that they, even though sometimes they react with horror, that's kind of the most of it. It's either just apathy or just screaming in horror. They've never actually had to face it themselves. And so the abjection to Death Clock is the notion of hope. And this image here is when he's talking to the whale goddess. She says, are you going to choose the fist or the hand? Are you going to lash out with violence like you always do, or are you actually going to try and choose hope? And his first idea was to choose violence. But then he does finally write the correct Song of Salvation, but in order to actually make sure that the whole world can hear it, they have to plug in these massive aux cords all around the world, and the band all plugs in their own, but due to technical difficulties, Nathan has to do his physically, and I have to click here again because the imagery of it is important.
And I'll grow stronger because I'll always have my relationship.
Yeah. So his relationship with music, huh? And then at the same time, because the band, all the members of the band all did that too, not literally that, but they all plugged it in as well. That connects them all, this relationship with music, this relationship with each other, all coming from plugging in their aux cords, which is a new euphemism. So the acceptance of his relationship with his band in favor of a relationship that is expected of him with a woman, and in his ability to write the true song Salvation that is still stylistically melodic death metal, still what Death Clock sounds like, but is actually reflecting these true feelings for once. He is able to then give his plea of taking this hand this last time. Nathan disregards the concerns of maintaining true to his aesthetic, and instead holds the authenticity of himself and the love he does have for others. As Chris Saber would say, writing causes the subject who ventures into it to confront an archaic authority on the nether side of the proper name. The the maternal connotations of this authority never escaped great writers, no more than coming face to face with what we have called abjection. So he's finally showing that he will prioritize a relationship with music and thusly his bandmates, one that is more artistically authentic to himself and his true feelings. So they're finally able to face the abject in this broader sense because they were forced to by the actual abject force that they, until pretty recently in the timeline of the show, didn't even know about. And it takes this coming face to face to actually fully accept themselves and even accept the role that the whale prophet calls them herself, the quote beast daughters of the apocalypse. So again, taking in that abject, accepting it a feminine role according to her, and being okay with it finally, accepting the authenticity, but still having the authenticity of their musical sound. And references, thank you. He's fine.